My name is Francesca Leo. I'm the founder of playingwithoutpain.com, and I am currently on the board of the National Flute Association Performance Healthcare Committee. I'm so excited to talk today with Katherine Lewis, who is going to share with us a little bit about her background and her work and advocacy for disabilities in musicians. So, Katherine, if you could start by just saying a little bit about yourself, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank you so much for having me on today. It is such a delight to get to talk with you and kind of give you a little bit of background as to my work and what we're doing and planning going forward. So I'm excited to do this. My background is predominantly in flute performance. So I did kind of that stereotypical musician path that everyone knows so much about. I did my undergraduate at Arkansas Tech University in flute performance, and then went on to pursue my master's in flute performance in Ohio. I did not finish that master's because I got an opportunity to go to play for the United States Army bands. I won an audition with the Army in 2013. And so I kind of took a different path. I went straight to performing instead of finishing that degree. But in 2019, I actually went back to school and finished a second master's in arts advocacy and cultural leadership from Colorado State. It's their Malcolm degree. Most people look at those acronyms and they're like, what on earth is that? But it's basically arts advocacy. So after I got that degree, I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. Advocacy has always kind of been an interest of mine, but I didn't actually do anything professionally with it until it basically became my life. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later when we get into digging deep into the disabilities musicians. But I ended up with several chronic disabilities of my own. And so through that experience of personally going through those situations and through that kind of life-changing experience, I was able to create a professional career surrounded by what I learned and what I wanted other musicians to be able to have to better navigate that experience. And so I founded Musicianable in 2020 at the very beginning of this year. And so it is an advocacy platform and a coaching business that helps musicians to reinvent careers and success and thriving experiences in music after they have suffered some sort of injury, illness, or disability. So that's what I'm up to now, in addition to continuing to perform and teach. But that's a little bit of my background. So let's get started with the rest, I guess.
Yeah, that sounds so awesome. And I'm super interested in your master's degree in arts advocacy. I've never heard of that, and I didn't even know it was an option for a master's program. So I'd love if you could talk a little bit more about that later on. But
Okay.
again, so you spoke on it a little bit, but what got you interested in disability and physical limitation research with flutists and musicians in general?
So about 4 years into my Army music career, I started suffering repeated injuries, and I had the typical injuries that you see in musicians, tendonitis, tension-related injuries, strain muscles, that kind of thing that we always talk so much about in music. But I was also having other really bizarre symptoms and experiences that I didn't really understand. And it was affecting my joints and it was affecting my connective tissue. And I thought, oh, I'm just, playing wrong. I played that blame game that musicians are notorious for of, well, I must be doing something wrong. I must need to just practice more, and I kind of learned the hard way of what was going on was something that actually needed to be addressed. And so I was actually diagnosed with 2 autoimmune diseases and 1 neuroinflammatory disease, which, like I said, affects my joints and my connective tissue. So I'm incredibly prone to injury. And so through that, I actually was medically retired from service in 2019 at the end of this last year. And so basically my career as I knew it ended because of my physical limitations. I was struggling to play the same way as I did. I was struggling to um, play as much as I wanted. I was having all of these difficulties in and out of the practice room. And for the longest time, I thought I'm the only one. It's a very isolating experience to have an injury, illness, or disability that is chronic, that isn't going to go away. And the more I started talking to my colleagues and my educators and superiors in my career field and friends that I have across the music industry, the more I realized that I was far from the only one. But the next thing I realized was that if I was far from the only one, why did I not know it? And so I started asking these questions of, where are all of these other musicians that have these physical limitations and mental limitations if I don't know about them? And so I started digging for the answer of why that was. And I found that really the conversation about chronic or permanent physical or mental limitation in music is a conversation that we're just not having. We talk so much about injury prevention and injury treatment and healing and fixing that problem, and everything is focused on getting back to the practice room, which absolutely we want that to be the ultimate goal. Mm-hmm. But the conversation is very much only one side of that coin and one very small part of the picture. And so I became interested in starting that conversation and giving musicians with disabilities like I have, or different limitations than my own of any kind, resources and outlets for being able to have the careers that they want and not be literally limited in their career by whatever may be going on with them physically.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for sharing. That's such an amazing story. And I'm so glad to hear that you've been able to research a lot about it and advocate for it. I could really relate to that. I have a history of autoimmune disorders in my family. And so I've never been officially diagnosed with one, but I do experience chronic pain and chronic inflammation. So I've been thinking more and more that that could be a possible link to why I'm so prone to injury, because I was severely injured a couple of years ago too by playing the flute, and it's gotten better. I've gotten able to manage it, but it's just never completely gone away. So I've been thinking about it more and more, and I really think I should just take the step to have that consultation with medical professionals and see if that could be a possible link. So it's so fascinating, and that can help so much.
I'm glad, because one of the things that I think a lot of musicians struggle with is that fear of taking that step and talking to someone about it, because it's not a secret that our career field is one that is dependent on our bodies. I mean, you have to use your body in order to play the instrument.
Yeah.
And so in the back of our minds, there's this absolutely, controlling fear that you may go to a doctor or a healthcare professional of some kind and be told, yeah, you're not going to play your instrument again. I think that's in the back of our minds all the time. And I want to make it less scary to have those conversations, because it's not the end of the road to get a diagnosis.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I think so many people will be able to relate to this, and not just me. So it's really amazing that you're talking about it. Thank you so much.
I'm happy to.
So my next question is, what do you wish to see more of in terms of representation or advocacy for disabled musicians in music education and or the wellness industry?
Oh, that is such a loaded question.
You can put it into smaller parts.
Representation is such a complicated issue for any minority population, and really the awareness and the understanding that musicians with disabilities or people with disabilities are a minority group. And one of the things right now that is such a benefit to starting this conversation is that globally and in this country and as an industry even, we are talking so much more about minority groups, you know, with the BIPOC movement and, you know, LGBTQI rights, and making sure that those populations are well represented and have efficacy and equality and equity is at the forefront of a lot of the social conversations that we're having. And it's amazing to see that those groups are finally being able to have their platform. And I want that for the musicians or people with disabilities group as well.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things is the awareness and understanding that we are a minority population just like the others. And so we have many of the same kinds of categorical obstacles that you would see in any minority population. Representation is one of them. I would love to see in music education a lot more emphasis put on how do I want to say this? What word am I looking for? I would love to see much more of the ability for educators to have the autonomy in their classrooms and the support in the music education sector, whether it be their school board or their principal or whatever it may be in their administrative staff, to give I cannot think of the word, Francesca.
That's okay. No worries.
Accommodations. Okay,
Yeah.
there we go. Okay.
All the time.
Oh, that was a doozy. So accommodations, because a lot of students that may have some sort of disability are discouraged from music programs. And that is not the answer. That is not the route that I want to see taken. And it's a balancing act. I have lots of music educator friends in the public school systems, and I feel for the obstacles that they have just being able to get students in the classroom on a regular basis that are able-bodied, whatever it may be. But we can't forget about making sure that all students of all abilities have the opportunity to study music if they want to.
Right.
And so I would like to see a lot more of an effort made and resources given to creating those inclusive spaces for students who want to pursue music. In the wellness industry, I really would love to see an emphasis put on not only prevention and treatment, but navigating the reality and coming to terms with the reality that treatment or prevention or cures are not always an option. There are some kinds of conditions or injuries or whatever it may be that you can live with for your whole life. Mental health is a big one. A lot of people don't know that mental health conditions are actually protected by the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so a lot of students and professionals that have mental health conditions can actually get protections as someone that is classified as someone with disabilities. And so it's an awareness thing. I would love to see much more awareness and emphasis put on being able to live a thriving and successful life and career, even if you can't prevent, treat, or cure something.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That was really thorough and really amazing. And I really didn't know that mental health disorders could be classified as disabilities under the ADA. So that was fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm into that. Thank you.
Part of the research that I was able to do was, and I actually learned it through a friend, believe it or not, a very dear friend of mine who was in her PhD program and had mental health conditions, and she had to walk away from school for a semester, and she was afraid that she wasn't going to be able to stay in her program, but come to find out, she was actually able to get the protections that she needed to be able to continue school in a modified way through the accommodations that she was given. So I was a chance learning curve for me. I actually came by that on accident.
Wow, that's amazing. And I know that mental health is being talked about more and more, but I think there's still a lack of connection between talking about mental health and then actually helping students through navigate things like semesters and college classes with the ability to take time off if they need to, because I think there's still such a long way that we all need to go in addressing mental health issues and the student and professionals' capacity to fulfill their duties, and sometimes it's just not possible.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, that's really fascinating, and I can't wait to look more into that. Yeah, so thank you so much for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would love to know more about what you're up to now, and I would love if you could talk more about the advocacy masters, because I think a lot of people would be interested in that and don't know about it. But you wear many different hats in your professional career. So also, what advice do you have to musicians pursuing portfolio careers much like your own? So if you could talk a little bit about what you're doing right now, and then also any advice that you have to, let's say, people like me or people like anybody watching who might be interested in learning how to balance things better.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's definitely a juggling act. I will say that. I'll talk a little bit about the degree program that I did first, just so I don't forget to backtrack and go to
Yeah,
that. So Colorado State University actually is one of the only programs that exists that offers a bachelor's and master's program in what they call arts leadership and cultural management. And when I first looked at the program, I really didn't know what that meant. I just knew that I wanted to do something in addition to playing as a degree program, which I'd already done before. But the more I learned about the program, the more I realized that it was perfect for me and my station in life at the time. I'd already had my diagnoses. I was already starting to understand how I fit in the world as someone who is now in a minority group, particularly one that is very much not talked about and very not understood in a lot of ways. And so it became this perfect fit. So the program is designed basically to not only give you the tools to be an administrator in either a nonprofit or arts-based organization, business, whatever it may be, performing arts center, summer camp, those kinds of organizations. But it also delves really deep into social diversity and how to address social issues as an arts program, and how to ensure that you are creating inclusive spaces and inclusive products for not only yourself, your employees, your staff, but also your audience and your patrons. So it kind of goes full circle into the ins and outs of the business aspect, but also the social equity aspect, which is a really nice and very unique marrying of the two kinds of programs. Think sort of sociology, but also arts administration, I would say, is the best way I can describe the program. But that program actually is what launched me into truly knowing in my heart that there was something that I needed to do on a professional level with advocacy for musicians with disabilities, especially since I was experiencing the reality that it's not really a conversation that we're having.
Yeah.
And it became my mission through learning how to create a program or an organization that addressed those things. It became my goal to do that. And so that's what I did. I created Musicianable, which I talked a little bit about at the very beginning, but it's an organization and community that I've created through my website and also the group, The Well Musician on Facebook, for musicians of all ability levels to learn about the different kinds of limitations, physical and mental limitations that they can potentially have throughout a career. And I coach musicians who have had those experiences to reinvent themselves in their career, because it is definitely a career wrench. It definitely throws things into a different whirlwind
Yeah.
when you have these kinds of diagnoses. And a lot of musicians, myself included, when I was experiencing it, really don't know where to turn. They really don't know what to do next. And so I work a lot with musicians with physical and mental limitations, but I also do a lot of advocacy work with organizations and individuals that are able-bodied to understand the disability community and to better enable us, support us, be better and more prepared colleagues and educators for musicians who may have these kinds of experiences and limitations, because a lot of the industry doesn't really know how to accommodate and support and empower these musicians. And so a lot of times they're left confused or just kind of not dealing with it at all. And that's not the right answer. So I want to give musicians the right answer so that they can go forward as individuals, but also organizations on the right foot.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
So that's a lot of the work that I'm doing. I'm putting most of my efforts into that advocacy work. I do have a private studio at the same time, and I do still do some performing, mostly sub work. Because of my physical health, I don't perform full time anymore. But I do continue to have that outlet through subbing, and it fulfills me as a performer enough to do that. And I learned to be okay with that level of performing, that I don't have to be full-time in an orchestra somewhere to be able to be called a real musician. That was a big learning curve for me too. And that's some of the work that I do with Musicianable too, is walking musicians through understanding that.
That's awesome. So what advice would you have for someone who's just starting out, wanting to do many different things in the music industry, but not really knowing how to juggle all of them at once?
That is a very good question. The biggest thing that I always tell musicians or anyone looking to do a portfolio career is really sit with the things that speak to you. I have a process through and we focus on 8 areas of life. It's kind of the well-being principles, I call them. They're the magic 8. And if you're unbalanced in any area of your life, you're not going to be able to have the kind of career goals and reach them the way you want to, because you don't have the level playing field in your life. You don't have the balance. So I always tell musicians, think about what speaks to your soul first. What would you do if you could do nothing else except that one thing every day for the rest of your life? And it's much less specific than I want to play my instrument. I always tell people, well, what would you want to do with your instrument? Do you want to help people? Do you want to entertain? What kind of larger, more broad thing do you actually want to do? So we kind of focus a little bit more on the abstract, on the large scale concepts of what you want to do with the tasks that you're giving. So playing your instrument isn't what I call a task. That's not something that speaks to you the same way as what you want to do with that task, which is to help or to entertain or whatever it may be. So I always want people to answer that question first. That's the foundation, basically, of your house, so to speak. And then go from there. So if that's the one thing you want to do, then I want you to answer the question, how are you going to do that? What are 3 things? I like to keep it small so it's more manageable. What are 3 things that you could do as a musician to do that one thing every day? And we kind of just chip away at it from there. You can have many different hats. You can, what I like to say, you can have your cake and eat it too. And that's what the portfolio career gives people. So if there are like 3 or 4 different things that you want to do every day, you can have that. But you have to have a way to cohesively marry them together. So think about how you can connect those things with your tasks to make them happen every single day. And then go from there and build your career around those.
Absolutely. That's such great advice. Thank you so much. And it seems like more and more we are kind of having the opportunity to have these portfolio careers as musicians, and especially now we're having to do so many different things and jump through so many obstacles to keep playing music during these times. So I think it's allowing people to learn a lot of new skills and actually find that maybe their interests lie in a niche within the music industry.
And that's a good point that I always remind not only myself, sometimes I have to remind myself, but musicians have this quirky belief that if you do anything or like anything besides music or besides playing your instrument, that you've somehow not made it, or you're a failure,
Right.
or you're not a real musician anymore. And that is one of the biggest things that I talk about, is narratives. Tearing down those narratives of the beliefs that are just either harmful or just untrue, like that one. You don't have to do nothing but music to be called a musician, to be able to have a career as a musician.
Right.
Do what you love, regardless of what that is. It's your life, it's your career, and I want people to take ownership of that. That's the biggest advice I can give, is take ownership of what you want to do. You don't have to do anything else to impress, anybody in the music industry. The ones that matter, the people that matter in music, are the ones that want you to be happy regardless of what you do. And that's what I want everyone to be able to take away, is that you owe nothing to the music industry or anyone in it to do nothing but music, because it's just going to end up frustrating you in the end anyway.
Absolutely. That's wonderful advice. I wish you would have told that to me 10 years ago.
I wish someone had told me that 10 years ago.
I know, but it's so great hearing it now. It's like, I was like, man, I really needed to hear that. This is going to be so helpful for so many people. So thank you. Yeah.
More people need to be saying it. So
Yeah.
I will say it as many times as I have to.
Yeah, absolutely. That was awesome. Okay, so the final question I have for you is, what advice do you have for disabled musicians in terms of navigating professional careers in music? And are there specific resources that you recommend? And I know that your website is one of them, and I will definitely list that information for anyone who would like to learn more.
Absolutely. One of the biggest things that I think, for me at least, when I was trying to navigate a career as a musician with disabilities, was this fear that we have, even if you don't necessarily identify as someone with disabilities, even if you have a short-term injury or illness or whatever it may be that's affecting your playing, we are so terrified as musicians to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Even though the majority of musicians in the professional sector report having some sort of performance related and performance affecting physical limitation at some point in their career, no one talks about it. If we're hurt, we don't say anything. We just power through. And so we have to stop doing that as an entire industry. Able-bodied, disabled, whatever, we have got to be willing to speak up. If you have some sort of accommodation that you need, I encourage musicians to say something. So many of us, especially with freelancers, a lot of freelancers express to me a fear that they won't be hired if they say something. And that is one of the downfalls of federal protections, is that the ADA does not actually give protections really very well to freelancers. And so a lot of freelancers feel like they're kind of on their own. Yeah. And that's one of the things that we're trying to change, is having organizations be prepared to receive those conversations, as well as musicians being prepared to have them. I would advise that musicians who start those conversations come to the table with what I've kind of coined, the term overcoming objections.
Mm-hmm.
We all are busy, especially right now in the music industry. Everyone is completely overwhelmed. And when we go back eventually to in-person concerts and in-person performances, there's going to be a lot of overwhelm there too.
Yeah.
And it's not going to go away. It's not going to get any easier. I foresee that that's going to continue. It's just the nature of our industry.
Mm-hmm.
So if you as a musician can come to the table and say, these are accommodations that I need, or these are things that I need to change or have happen, and these are the steps that I can take, or me and the section leader can take to
Mm-hmm.
make that happen, I encourage people to do so.
Yeah.
Already have a plan in place. Talk to your section head, talk to your colleagues, figure out a plan before you have these conversations, so that by the time you go to your concertmaster or your arts director or whatever it may be, you can say, yes, I do need accommodations, and yes, it is complicated, and I understand that it's difficult. However, I've already created a solution for you.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting that, should it be that way? No. But we have to take baby steps in order to change the culture of the industry. And right now, that's the way to do it. I've had several colleagues and several instances myself where this route was actually successful. Art directors and administrators and arts leaders are much more able and willing to provide the things that disabled musicians need,
Mm-hmm.
if you've already figured out how they can do that for them, especially since it's very much a conversation that is in its baby stages. A lot of able-bodied musicians don't know how to create inclusive spaces. So at this point, it's kind of on us as musicians with disabilities to help them to understand how they can do that best. And the first step of that is by speaking up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's wonderful. And it's such a shame that it has to be that way right now. And I can only hope that throughout our advocacy in performing arts health, we can start to be more aware of people with disabilities and more aware of how to accommodate them better in the
Absolutely.
music industry. And so this was so insightful today. Thank you so much. And I,
Absolutely.
I learned a lot. I hope everyone else listening will learn a lot as well. Are there any final things that you would like to say, or anything coming up that you're excited about that you'd like to talk about? Any advice? Any final words?
I encourage anyone watching this to head over to my website, musicianable.com. It has a great deal of information about being a musician with disabilities, and I am actually revamping the resource page, so stay tuned for more. I've created a lot of materials that musicians, both able-bodied and with disabilities, can go to in order to start having these conversations. Already made materials, checklists, correspondence, email designs, how to start these conversations, so that musicians and colleagues are not quite in the dark figuring out how to do it themselves. So if you have any questions, absolutely reach out to Francesca or me, and let's continue the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again. And I will link all of your website and your articles and all of your resources in the description below to this video. So I'm looking forward to learning more. And thank you so much. This was so awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a delight.